Who will be Washington's top 5 players in 2025?
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the days. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And just a reminder, no matter where you're getting this podcast, it's here on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, anywhere. Make sure you hit that subscribe, that follow button, whatever it might be, as it really does help us out a lot. Make sure you leave a like on the video, comment down below if you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that. And just a reminder as well to follow us on all forms of social media, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We're there at Locked On Huskies. Check it out. We got a lot of fun stuff coming over there as well. Lars, we got a really fun show coming at the Everydayers today. Also on this Thursday, we're going to talk about the importance of Washington's strength staff this season. They made a couple hires in that department. There are a lot of other things that are going on in that realm that are really interesting, but we wanted to have some fun. We're going to spend a whole bunch of time talking about the top 5 Huskies on this roster for the 2025 season. We both have our lists. We didn't tell each other if there were any criteria or anything because I have mine with one stipulation attached. I don't know about you. For me, I have no Demond Williams on my list. I wanted to challenge myself a little bit, so I don't know about you, but let's just start with number 5. Who you got?
So number 5 is probably going to be one that's on your list, but I was kind of torn on this because I didn't know where to put him, but I'm going to leave him at 5, and it's Alex McLaughlin. Because
he's my honorable mention. I left him off. Yeah, that was tough.
So that's why I put him at 5. Is I'm like, you know what? I can't say he's not going to be 3, 2, or 1, but I think at the end of the day, he's going to lead the team, or if not, be close to leading the team with tackles. And I think just his all-around presence, as long as he plays an entire 12, 13 games, I just have a hard time not seeing him be one of those guys that's slightly, again, I can see the honorable mention. I can see the case being, so I'm going to make the case for it. He just seems like a guy where there's no way he can't have too much of a presence. Like the way he plays, it's going to be impossible.
Oh no, I absolutely agree. So one of the reasons I did leave him off was I was kind of like, everybody knows my McLaughlin agenda. I want to have some fun talking about the honorable mention, but I want to do that now because I love everything you just said. Because for me, one thing you and I talked about, as Ryan Walters has come in and as we've kind of seen what he wants to do take place, is Dylan Tiedemann. Over his 2 years at Purdue, we saw him be super productive, which is exactly what Alex McLaughlin was at Northern Arizona. So I just kind of see him playing a very similar role in that defense. And, whether it is playing mainly nickel, playing a little bit more safety, rotating around, walking down, whatever that might be, I'm really excited to see what that's going to look like. So leave him off my honorable mention. I'll do that right now because, Lars, we had very similar thought processes at number 5. Where at number 5, I went with somebody who, hey, maybe this guy leads the league, or not leads the league, leads the team in tackles. And for me, that's Xe'ree Alexander, the transfer from Central Florida, where everything you just said in terms of the production, what he could bring to the table, I would say all those things for Alex McLaughlin, all those things certainly hold true for Xe'ree Alexander as well. And the more I watch his film, the more I say, maybe he will start over Buda Alukta. I think that's going to be, depending on what the scheme looks like, where Ryan Walters usually has one inside linebacker on the field. But the more, and with Buda, he was a little bit more productive in terms of finding the ball with 3 picks, 4 forced fumbles, 3 fumble recoveries, things like that. But with Xe'ree Alexander, just his size and what he brings to the table, the way he's able to come downhill, I like that just a little bit more at this point in time. So I said, because I think he's going to lead the team in tackles, it's going to be somebody from that position, in my opinion. Give me Xe'ree Alexander at number 5. And I thought that was just somebody who's going to be a fun local addition to this team.
So he was kind of my honorable mention in that group of, depending on which linebacker ends up kind of being the guy. I had Buda just a little bit higher. But again, if you're talking between 4, 5, 6, and 7, that's the tough part where this is the top 5. And we said predicting top 10. Now it becomes even insurmountably harder. But for me at number 4, went on offense because this is one where, and again, taking your criteria, I didn't take that into consideration. I'm going to put Demond at 4. And the reason why I'm going to put Demond at 4 is because he's going to have an impact, but I still don't actually think at the end of the day he is like the guy that makes everything go because you still have to have some offensive linemen. You still have to have Jonah Coleman in the run game. I know I said he would lead the Big Ten in total yards at the end of the season. I still believe that, but I still just at this point I don't want to put. He's not one. I can't put him at one. Plus, I think there's going to be a few other guys that he helps maybe get to that point. But I think when you add Omari Evans, a healthy Kevin Green, who maybe are some honorable mention guys, maybe top 5 guys, who knows. But I think all those things together, I'm going to put DeMond at 4 just for the sake of, since you left him off your list, I'm glad you did it. So that way I'll give him the opportunity there, but I don't want to put him any higher than that because, again, this is still his first year starting. So if this was his junior year, now we're talking is he 1 or 2, not one sort of thing, or not 2, not in that regard. So I'll put DeMond at 4, just kind of let that be like an optimism kind of take right there.
So I like where you're going with that. I couldn't agree with you more. For me, it was, hey, with the way Jedd Fisch has talked about him, with the way that he's just been talked up on this podcast and throughout, when we talked to guys at Media Day, when we watched him in the Sun Bowl, it was kind of like, if you don't put it, in my opinion at least, if you don't put him at 1, it feels like you're not necessarily doing him a disservice, but it's just kind of going back to what we said. So I agree with everything you said because you want to manage those expectations a little bit, right? At least off the top where we're going to get to Colorado State and UC Davis. We're going to see what that looks like. So I certainly like where you're going with that. For me, you talk about getting some offensive line help. And number 4, I have Carver Willis, where I look at Carver Willis and I say, when we watched him, when he came in from Kansas State, everything was, hey, this is going to be a sturdy, reliable guy who can do everything in pass game, the run game that you need for DeMond Williams for one season. And the way Michael Switzer talked about him, the way Jedd Fisch talked about him, the way he spoke was, yeah, we haven't figured out if it's going to be left tackle or right tackle yet. It's going to be a tackle spot. That's what we know. And Lars, this is an offensive line unit that gave up 39 sacks last season. That was the most in the Big Ten. And that's, combined with especially what happened in those last 2 games in Oregon and at the Sun Bowl, it was really ugly. So getting somebody who can really just steady the room in Carver Willis, you have a lot more depth at the position now, but having somebody like that who can really make a big time impact is something that cannot be understated enough. And as we get into April and watch spring practice, I think we're really going to see him stand out.
Oh, I completely agree. And I think it's a matter of can everything come together in the right way, which for me is where number 3 comes into play. Is probably one of your guys as well. And that's Zach Durfee. And again, it's all comes down.
Okay. I don't have him. Yeah.
So this is a high end kind of, predicting. So we're saying predicting the top 5 Huskies at the end of the season, right? This was not going into the season. In my head, this was at the end. Like, who will be the guys at the end of the day? If Zach Durfee stays healthy, if everything goes according to plan, I think Zach Durfee will be in that tier of guys where I don't want to predict the number of sacks just because watch me say like 12.5 and he has like 3. But just if he ends up having, let's say, like a Howley Kakaha type of emergence, that is kind of what I'm envisioning with this, where he just strikes me as a guy, as long as he can stay healthy. If it wasn't for the toe issue last year, I think he would have had a major impact. So give me some Zach Durfee at number 3.
So I love that. I don't have Zach Durfee on my list, but I'll tell you who my number 3 is after the break, which we'll get to right after a message from our friends over at Roy. Attention, Locked On Huskies fans. The future of college sports is here, and it's transparent. Before the Roy app, NIL negotiations often happened under the table, and fans didn't have a clear way to directly support the athletes they love. Now with Roy, you get to be part of the change and support Washington athletes in the most transparent way possible. Roy, the NIL app, allows you to choose the player you want to support, to decide how much to contribute, and receive exclusive content from the athletes you back. The best part, if your player transfers, you get your money back. It's a risk-free way to show your support. The Roy app is giving fans control. No more uncertainty. Now you can provide transparent, impactful support and help shape the team and the future of college sports with your contributions. Download the Roy app now from the App Store and start backing Washington athletes the way they deserve, with transparency, trust, and a real impact. This is the future of college sports. Join it now by downloading Roy and supporting your favorite players. Lars, I don't think there will be any surprise around my number 3. It's Jonah Coleman, where getting a guy like that back for his senior season, if you go check out Pro Football Focus, they have Jonah listed right now as the number 4 returning running back in the nation. Number 2 in the Big Ten, by the way, where you've got Jeremiah Love up there, number 1, Isaac Brown, who we got to watch in the Sun Bowl at number 2, and then Nicholas Singleton from Penn State at number 3. So that's a really nice group of running backs to be a part of. It's certainly not what this past year was at the position with Ashton Genty, Omarion Hampton, Caleb Johnson, Kyle Monungai. There are so many talented running backs. That's without even including the Ohio State guys that were at the position this season. So I think this is one of the biggest reasons Jonah came back, because obviously last year didn't go the way that he had hoped under Jedd Fisch and, his first year at Washington. And he talked about wanting to get a degree and how that's a huge part of his thinking as well. But I think that he really has a chance to establish himself as arguably the best running back in the country this season. And I put him at number 3 because what's that going to look like? And it's through no fault of his own, right? We want to see the offensive line take a step forward. We're expecting him to probably have a somewhat lighter workload than he did last season, with Damon Williams taking some carries, with Adam Muhammad taking a step forward and taking a little bit of a bigger role. So I think that Jonah, no matter what, is going to be a massive part of what Washington is going to do this season. And I think the numbers that he'll put up will end up being somewhat similar because he's super efficient. What was it? 5.5 yards a carry this last season. Like, the numbers are there, but between the impact that Damon might have on his workload and the impact Adam Muhammad might have on his workload, I think he's still going to really shine and really stand out, but I couldn't put him any higher than 3.
And let's not forget one of the reasons why I was so high on him when Jake Butt came on the show, and it's his pass blocking. That's an equally important part of his game. And to your point, that's kind of why I challenged myself in the way of I flipped Damon to Jonah. So Jonah would have probably been at 4 and Damon would have been at 6 in my kind of hypothetical mind here. But in that respect, because of everything you just said, where Jonah having a little bit less doesn't mean he's going to be worse in terms of he could still have even actually more yards. But if he has less touches, it becomes a big, home run type of style. How you're getting the yards and all those sorts of things. So that's why I kind of was let me challenge myself just a little bit, give Damon some credit since you took Damon off your list, not because you don't believe in Damon, but just because you wanted to challenge yourself. So I kind of that was kind of my thought process there. But I completely agree. Like, Jonah is still going to be a very impactful part of this offense, but this is where things get interesting because now we have 2 spots left. And in my head, I'm like, well, I'm going to go 1 offense and 1 defense. And ironically, it's you probably see where I'm going with this. So
I think we might be aligned here. Yeah.
So, but I'm going to go bold here, and I'm going to go Tacario Davis at 2.
All right. I like this.
And the reason why is going to be very obvious at 1, but it all works together because it's why you went and got Tacario. You're going to help Reason Sprysock. You're going to help Alex McLaughlin, who's also in the top 5. Everything kind of comes together in the secondary in that role, especially with John Richardson and him reuniting. He took a little bit of a dip, as everybody did at Arizona last season, Radical Dios, everybody at Arizona who stayed for Brent Brennan's first season. But now he's back with John Richardson. And I think, especially with Ryan Walters, like having the combination of those two with Walters has a strong secondary presence, shall we say. I just have a hard time not seeing him be in the top 3, but I don't know if I can put him at 1 just yet for one reason or another.
So I did put him at 1. And I think the biggest reason is under John Richardson, we saw what it looked like in 2023. We saw him have, 15, 16 pass breakups, be an all Pac-12 honorable mention, which is still shocking with the production that he had. And it's one of those things where, coming out of that season, I was texting with a friend of mine in the NFL draft community who before the season had Tacario ranked in the same ballpark as Will Johnson, Travis Hunter, and Benjamin Morrison. Like, he was right there I think he had him at corner 4, right outside of those top 3 guys who we're all going to see go in the first round in April. And the reason I say all that is because that's where Tacario can be next season. And without some of those guys, who's to say that he is not the best cornerback in the country in the 2025 season? With another year under John Richardson, with what we've seen this Ryan Walters defense be able to do for guys in the secondary. When you think about Sidney Brown, you think about Devon Witherspoon, what they look like in college, where obviously it's going to be a little bit different with just the way Tacario plays the game than it was for Devon Witherspoon. But the reason I put Tacario at 1 is because if I were one of our favorite games on the show, Lars, is 1 award, who gets it? My 1 award might be Tacario Davis for the Jim Thorpe Award right now at this point in time, because he just has that level of talent. He can be that elite and be the first cornerback off the board next season. And that's another thing that played into my assessment here was, honestly, like you talked about it being a little bit of a tough decision for me. I'm not going to lie. I put Tacario at 1 and I was like, all right, how am I going to figure this out from that point on? Because if he is, again, the first corner off the board, a top 10 pick in the 2026 NFL draft, I'm not going to be shocked.
No, but the other reason behind that is kind of almost everything you said for the reason why the guy that I have at 1, that's Denzel Boston.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think, to your point about the Jim Thorpe award, I don't think Denzel, I don't think he could, but it's kind of that Marvin Harrison when he won the Blitnikoff award, which can you beat out Ryan Williams? Can you beat out Jeremiah Smith? Yeah, and a few other guys. But there was that one tweet that had like, hey, who wide receiver 4 is a complete crapshoot. Like, about that. Like Denzel, I
agree.
Much of this entire team, Denzel is getting slept on, not getting slept, getting slept on. And I think to me that's why I put Demond at 4. You have a couple other guys in there. Like if everything goes according to plan, if Carver ends up being a top 5 tackle, which I think he can be, I just left him off my list because I agree predicting top 5. Carver's probably a top 5 player, but it's just hard to say as a left tackle, like, hey, he's your guy in the top 5, especially with some other options. He'd be like 6 or 7 in a normal list. It doesn't take away from how good he is. But everything comes together, and that means that Denzel can, again, be one of the top 3 receivers in the Big Ten, if not the country. We all know he's going pro after next season. So this would be like, hey, this is your NFL experience. This is your go-get-it type of moment. And I think that's why him and Demond are going to have so much success and why Jonah might, again, kind of like you said, take a little bit more off than he did last season.
So I certainly like where you're going there, and I agree with you because I had Denzel at 2. Couldn't leave him any lower on the list, in my opinion, than at number 2. So I certainly don't disagree with you putting him at 1 because it's one of those things where we saw early on in the season last year, he thrived. He was absolutely spectacular through the Iowa game, let's say. And he was still really good after the Iowa game. He didn't score after that, but it was one of those things where as defenses started to get adjusted to him and we saw the offensive line, it was solid to start the year. And then we just saw it deteriorate. So it was something that it really played a role in what Denzel's production looked like over the second half of the season. But if the offensive line does take a step forward this season with Demond Williams at the helm, who has shown that he can get him the ball anywhere, anytime without any trouble with velocity, trouble with arm talent and placement and different things like that, I think we could see him improve on what was already a really strong year last year. And I'm excited to see what that's going to look like with a field stretcher across from him in Omari Evans, in whoever's going to be in the slot, whether it be Rasheed Williams. Kevin Green is the guy you and I think is going to be in that role right now. But I love that. Putting him at 2 is certainly, I don't think that you can get any lower than that. And then Jonah rounded at the top 3 seems like a solid way to just look at this. But Lars, let's get into an honorable mention or 2. Who do you have?
So for all I think I kind of already mentioned the Budu Elkie would be 1, and I would probably throw. I want to see Omari in spring practice before I really find out, what type of role. I know you just talked about the lockdown Penn State, and I don't discredit anything he said, but it just much like Jeremiah Hunter last season, where we thought like, hey, he's gonna be the guy in the red zone. You got this big unit, big target and all that sort of thing. And it just never happened. And I'm just like, What are we doing here? And so for that exact reason, it's like, you know what? Let me just kind of take a step back. And so I want to throw in both Omari and Kevin Green in that mix because I think if Demond is really able to pop, everybody in this offense is going to pop. And so I think that's those 3 would be my honorable mentions.
So I had 3. You've already talked about 2 of them. We talked about Alex McLaughlin right off the jump. That was the one where I was like, yeah, got to find a way to talk about him. That's been the agenda. That's been the one, right? The second one for me was Zach Durfee. I loved everything you said about him a little bit earlier, where the health is going to be a really big factor here. And I feel like we can say the same thing about a lot of guys along this defensive line because I wrestled with it, where Zach was the one I ended up going with. But I said to myself, this could be Taitayu Uyunglele. This could be Samode Pepa. This could be Ontario Thompson or Javon Parker or Armand Parker if either of them end up being healthy. That there are a lot of guys who could fill that role. Olonius Davis was another guy who I thought might end up being able to break out and earn his way into one of those spots. But Zach Durfee is the guy where we saw him at times be a game-changing edge rusher. We've heard about all the measurables, all the numbers that he puts up in the weight room off the field. And now it's just after the injury struggles he had last season, it's time to see those come to fruition on the field. And there's one guy, Lars, who we're going to find a way to segue perfectly into our conversation with the strength staff, and that's Landon Hatchett, where we cannot discount Landon Hatchett from these conversations. I look at this offensive line, and we know that Carver Willis and Landon Hatchett have already cemented their spots along the offensive line. but Landon is arguably more important right now because of his experience with Demond last season. They already have worked together a lot. And now that something, again, we've talked about before on the show, the fact that he's not coming off an injury this year is so crucial, where he's able to actually get his body right in the weight room. Instead of getting healthy, it's getting stronger. It's getting ready for Big Ten play, instead of saying, okay, I know I want to be able to participate in contact drills by this point in August, so these are all the things I have to do. No, now it's, all right, can I add 5-10 pounds of muscle? Can I actually do a lot of different things to just physically get stronger over the course of the offseason, which I think the strength staff is doing a really great job with. So Lars, speaking of the strength staff, this is something that Jedd Fisch mentioned a couple weeks ago at his, first offseason press conference that he did, where he talked about hiring Lance Ancar from North Alabama at the time. He's also worked at Alabama, at Ole Miss, at Southern Miss. And it's something where he said, we want guys that can run the Alabama strength program, which is, fitting when Tyler Owens, who won 3 national championships as Alabama's strength coach, or as one of their strength coaches, is running the room. But Lance Ancar has been brought in specifically to work with the offensive line. And we need to see this group get bigger, get stronger, get more physical over the course of this offseason. And I think he's going to play a big role in this, because this strength staff is going to be absolutely critical for these next, 6-7 months.
Yeah, and you're talking about, I completely agree about Landon's point and all that, but it's also for the Parker brothers, for the guys that are coming back from injury, or guys that are trying to get healthy, and even the guys that are coming in, where you're talking about how do you maximize your transfers? Well, your strength staff is one of them, because they're going to be with the team more than the coaches are until fall camp. I mean, in terms of you think about it, you have 15 spring practices, but then you still have all the rest of the summer, and then you get back to fall camp. Most of that time is when the coaches can't be around the players, and so you're looking at it. And I remember talking to T.O. being like, hey, how do you, this was back, I think, during one of the practices. And it's just like, who constructs it? Is it you? Is it Jedd? Is it this? And it's about the resources. It's about being able to hire more and more guys, because you look at what Jedd's been able to do. You have Ed Thompson as the speed director, Cadillac Mitchell, all these guys that are in the building. And then you add Lance to that mix. I don't remember if Lance was with, Scott Cochran, did he overlap? I don't know if you know.
Oh, I can't remember off the top of my head.
But the reason why I bring that up is it's like, that's what built Nick Saban's Alabama team. Like, yes, like Saban is an absolute menace to society, and a great recruiter and all that. Alabama Jones, all those sorts of things. God, that was hilarious. But with that being said, Scott Cochran was the guy that built that strength program. That was the guy where it's like, those are the type of guys you want around your team. And you same thing with T.O., where it's like, you just look at him and it's like, okay, yeah, I have no problem with this guy. You can really see. And same thing with Lance, where I remember when they posted his picture when he got hired, it's like, that is the guy I want on my strength staff.
Yeah,
that is the dude where it's like, who's your assistant strength guy? That guy. He's not your director. No, that's our director. Believe it or not.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, when Jedd talked about it, it's, hey, he's here to work with the offensive lineman. He is a former Remington Award winner, a former 2-time All-American. Having somebody like that with the offensive line is really important. One quick 20-second tangent I want to make, just in terms of resources, is we saw Jedd bring in another special teams coach on Wednesday as we record this, and Greg Froelich, who was a former Michigan offensive lineman who'd been the special teams coordinator at Charlotte over the last couple of seasons. And I put Lance and Greg into the same boat of just stacking resources and just saying, hey, this guy did a really good job at this, lower level school. Let me bring him up. Let me just try to get him on campus and get him into a role where he can, it's more about the delegation, right? Whereas I think Jedd wants to move more into a CEO type role. It's handing more things off. And, the play calling is the one thing where, hey, I'm not giving up control of that. But he brought in Ryan Walters as a former head coach to run the defense. He has brought in a couple of special teams guys who know what they're doing with that unit, instead of giving it to Jordan Paopao, who obviously struggled last season, but had some success with it at Arizona, and said, hey, let's just let you do what you're best at and bring in other guys who know what they're doing there. And it's the same thing with the strength program, where with Tyler Owens, it's, hey, I trust you to get this done. And there were certain guys last year where if you talk to, somebody like Denzel Boston, you talk about guys that really made a leap last year. It was, I certainly felt the difference where we had Ron McKeefer on this program. We know Ron McKeefer did a fantastic job with these guys. but it's just different, right? And it's not saying that one is better than the other, where I think both of them are certainly a major improvement on things that were going on in 2020, 2021, where it was just get everybody as big as you possibly can and don't worry about actual strength, actual muscle, anything like that. We're not going down that road today. But I look at all that and I say, with everything Tyler Owens has implemented and the way he is running this program, I think that year 2 could be when we see a lot of these guys make a major jump. And some of these underclassmen, especially in the trenches, when I think about the offensive line and what Lance Ancar can do with them, and look at the defensive line and say Bryce Butler, Omar Khan, Linneas Davis as the real trio of guys who aren't coming off injuries right now, I say, all right, if the strength staff really wants to prove how good they are, these are the guys I want to see that improvement from.
And then you add, some guys like Tacario Thompson, Logan Sagapolu, guys that, either didn't have major impact or like did have impact, but, kind of can still take that next step. There's still more to tap into. Maybe even Zach, and then you go to the other side of the equation with Zach Durfee and guys that are coming off injuries, and you put it all together, and it's why Jedd came to Washington. And some people might say like, oh, he's hiring all these other people. Like, is it diluting it? No, it actually makes things better, because it would be worse if you had just one, and because your point about Jordan Papa not being the tight end, not being the special teams coordinator, he'll still be involved with the special teams. He just doesn't have to be the guy directing it. It makes it easier for him to, focus more on recruiting and things like that. So all it does is you're adding bodies and you're stacking bodies, you're alleviating problems. That's what you're doing. Is you're making it easier on the main position coach, and you're making it easier on the head coach and the coordinators and everything. Everything trickles down from Jedd. And so in that respect, I'd be more concerned if you're kind of doing like all these other up and coming promotions. And it's like, wait, do we have any firm guys in the building? No, they're blending, up and comers with experienced guys. Like Ryan Walters with Aaron Van Horn, Lance with Theo. And so it's all these things coming together. Michael Brewster with Michael Switzer, like that, that interesting combination with Mike and Mike there. But with that being said, you just add it all together, and it's a good sign, because you're not making it on just one guy. You're not saying, hey, he's going to fix our O-line. We're going to, like, the thing that comes to mind is Jeff Tedford in 2016, when the amount of credit that
that's a great
and no slight to Jeff Tedford. Again, hope all is well with the health and all those sorts of things. But the amount of credit that he got might have been a little too much in hindsight, because it was almost like, hey, Jeff Tedford's our senior analyst, and he's going to be the guy that unlocks it. It's like, really? Not Jake Browning being in his second and third year, not Myles Gaskin, not Jonathan Smith, again, Jeff Tedford did have a role, but it's like, to me, it's more about everything coming together at the right time. And I think exactly what you're saying, which is year 2 is when you see the biggest jump. Year 1 was laying the foundation. So now those guys have a good foundation to build off of, but there's still plenty more to grow. And I think it's exactly why you would want to keep stacking those bodies.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things that, when we talk to Jonah Coleman, when we talk to a lot of these guys who have been around Jedd, and we listen to Jedd talk about that same thing, that laying the foundation, where now with a lot of these upperclassmen guys to, as Jonah Coleman would say, just show you how we do it sort of things, where it's, hey, we're going to lead by example. You're going to know what you need to do in terms of getting treatment, in terms of lifting, in terms of everything you need to do to make sure you're successful at this level. Those are all the sort of things that we can see this season, where with a lot of the guys that are still on the roster from last year, they were those underclassmen that we still haven't seen, where, think about guys that I just talked about Pocky Fee, or about Linneas Davis a minute ago. You could throw Pocky Fee now into that same role of guys that we really like and think could take that jump this year. You could see that physical transformation in the spring, where I remember we did an episode last year. We just talked a lot about after the first day or two of spring practice about the body types, about the changes, and about the way the team was getting bigger and getting stronger. And now with an extra year to really build on that, it can go nowhere but up, especially with what we saw last season. And, the trenches obviously being the most important part, but finding more physicality from the front seven as a whole. You bring in some guys who can do that, and then you add them to the strength program because they've already been in a college weight for 2-3 years. It's all going to do nothing but continue to stack days, and having a really accomplished and large strength staff can help that as well.
Exactly, because it covers all your bases. You can say, hey, we have specialists for the O-line, D-line, we have specialists maybe for linebackers and skill position players, but it all works under the direction of Tyler, and then you kind of factor everything together, and it's good, because otherwise if you had it as just T.O., maybe one other assistant, Like that's why Trey Mitchell, Cadillac Mitchell, whichever one, whatever name he goes by, you look at it and say, man, if the lineman can take another step. And then that's why all these little details where Jedd says, hey, our indoor facilities and these things, where those guys are practicing on the grass and turf and things like that. All those little things come into play when you're able to, as an offensive lineman, hey, I was able to get all these reps and I wasn't just kind of, having to do it in the mirror and those sorts of things. All those little details come into play. That's why I love that Jedd's emphasizing every single little detail.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing about this program, because it's why we want to devote some time to talk about the strength staff, where all the off-field staff, it all matters in this, where a lot of this does happen with the on-the-field coaches, right? That's why John Richardson, Jimmy Doherty, Kevin Cummings, Scotty Graham, Ryan Walters, everybody else, that's why they make the salaries that they do, because they're the ones making a huge impact in terms of development. But all the things that go on behind the scenes, the strength staff, everything else, nutrition, the medical staff, that all makes a huge difference and a huge impact. And as we expect this program to take a big step forward in 2025, those are all people that are going to play important parts in what could come next for this program. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all everydayers tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel through content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post new videos. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comments section. And if you're audio only, please, if it's 5-star reviews, it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Friday.